adjust that a little. Okay, so unfortunately I have the box top here with everything in it. Just finished up with Warrior Knights. This is the Fantasy Flight Edition. I got the bad news that I lost my intro for Age of Steam. That's irrevocable. I deleted whatever was made in it. That's just having to deal with this very slow channel of videos going up right now is something I'm not used to. And I didn't know how to handle the pile, especially when my movie maker was on the blink. Turns out that's not the Windows Manager, that's some sort of stupid HP dock service, I don't know, some sort of service agent or something that gives me a pretty little box and tells me, oh, you haven't updated your service agent in a while. That's all it does. I can control some other things from Windows that I know how otherwise to control. Anyway, to the game. I've played like I said in the intro, which may or may not actually be the real one for this too. I've played the old Games Workshop version a couple of times. And I remember the game kind of intrigued me. It was, in my view, more playable, fun, designed for people who weren't, you know, who were more coming over from the fantasy genre, the role-playing games and everything, more accessible than, say, Kingmaker was. But a little less tight in the rules, actually, and a little less, it didn't meet as many factors in terms of the feel correctly, even though it was probably more popular among that fantasy group because, you know, it wasn't linked to history and it was put out by Games Workshop. Of course, Games Workshop wasn't the monster that it became later, and Avalon Hill maybe was. So anyway, this is a definite reworking with some serious Euro elements in it, and surprisingly, I found them very pleasant, especially the flow of picking your action cards, them getting shuffled into different phases. So you pick them, you set them to different phases, they get shuffled in with everyone else's actions. So you don't know exactly when you're going to get to do things. It is kind of interactive in that sense, but you've made your decisions on what you're going to do ahead of time. Those decisions aren't so horribly related and convoluted that it's impossible to figure out what you want it to do. It's very easy. You draw the card. You might say, why did I put that in here? But in general, you have a pretty good idea what you can do with it. There aren't a lot of pieces on the board that you control. There really aren't a lot of options of what to do with your cards. The only actual complaint I have is this was all stuff that was handled kind of in the bookkeeping phase, other than moving the armies and fighting. And it's kind of spread the game into less of a war-themed game because that fighting just gets mixed in with all this other stuff. And it feels more of the time you're, you know, just collecting some resources for the assembly or for the church or you know, for your mercenaries or whatever. A lot of your actions don't really seem to do much. Still, I like the way it plays out, and I think it brings, you know, an intriguing new feel to this game that never really felt like it had quite enough flavor before. Now, I don't know if the flavor's been improved greatly. What I think actually has happened is it's been made into a tighter, better game. The rules are certainly a lot better, minus one factor, which is they're too damn big. You know, I complained about this with TI, Twilight Imperium, but this thing is just, you know, it takes up the wrong space. Maybe if it folded this way, it would be better. Then it would look like a regular rule book. No, I don't know. I don't know why this decision is made on this format of rule book, but I find it physically very challenging to cope with. Components are fantastic, and I went over that in the intro. The map is a good solid one, but what really impressed me the most were the plastic pieces. The design limited, numbers of them, but they were very good quality. The only objection that I've had in all the things, the cards are really great feel, counters are ultra thick, etc. The only thing that I had an objection with was the noble counters, being able to associate which noble counter went with which piece on the board, which I think would be easy if they're your counters and you're looking at them and that's it. I think it's a lot harder when you're trying to look at everyone else's pieces and try to understand, hey, who is that there? How many troops does he have? I think that could get in the way and slow things down a bit, or you could lose track. For the Warrior Knights expansion, similarly, that actually triggered off, I think, some of my thinking about, hey, the victory conditions should really be tweaked with a lot. And that brought one thing to mind for me. Recent discussion about CDGs, I came into the conclusion of these things aren't moddable. If I want to change something, if I want to tweak something, it's very, very hard. And with this, I'm immediately coming up with ideas. Okay, I can't play with the base mechanisms of the game any more than I can maybe throw out the CRT and this, that, and the other with ease. But what I can do is I can play with the victory conditions very easily. And I started to come up with some ideas that I would like better. The current victory conditions get rid of one of the base game ones, get rid of one of the complaints that the old Warrior Knights had, which was that it was too long. This is a much shorter game in the basic version, and you still have that old version total victory, conquer half the board. That'll be a long game if you do that. Now, what I'm looking at is perhaps even longer, because the advantages which go to the king aren't that great, which is after you get the king, which comes from this expansion, you fall to a victory condition which goes to something a little bit more absolute than winning some influence points. On the other hand, the whole, it gives you some options already in the rules, and it gives you the ability to modify things so that you can make the game that you like out of it, which I really like compared to a lot of games which are just, too fixed. You couldn't really tweak with them easily at all without really endangering damaging the whole game setup. Now, there's a lot of stuff in this box. It's quite full. Cards and plastic and all kind of stuff. And that barrel closes. Oh well. Yeah, I'll get back to that later. Let me see what I had here. Yeah, so the way the actions kind of play out when you're picking them, you feel like there should be a certain balance of them. In the original game, that balance just existed by the nature of the sequence of play, which is to say, okay, I get my taxation and I pay my wages and I can buy new mercenaries and we have an assembly. All these things just happened in order. In the new version, some things, for example, hiring mercenaries, I think probably happens a lot less because of what the players want to do. Now again, it's all up to the players. If they always pick that, then it'll happen more. But here's the problem. You don't have the cash to do it all the time. Now naturally, this is actually kind of a nice factor because in the original game, there would be actions that came up or portions that came up that maybe, you didn't have the cash for the mercenaries then either, and you're just wasting a phase on that each time. Not a big waste. But if you didn't have the money, hey, why are you doing this? Okay, but in this case, it's eating up some of your cards that are sitting out there for a while. It means that maintenance isn't likely to come as often as it did in the original game. So if you're not out there hiring mercenaries and nobody's playing other cards into there very often, then what you see is taxation becomes more common than maintenance, and maybe the tightness of the money that was in the original game wasn't there. Now this allows for a more flexible game because, again, the players have some control. If I'm sitting there and I have no problem with maintenance, even if I don't want troops, I may be throwing my cards into there. There's a disadvantage to that, though, which is that if I'm putting my cards into piles that no one else is really playing in, I may not ever see my cards again. And that's that's kind of a worrisome thing to me. You don't have enough control to push that event into happening on your own. In the original game, somebody with an oversized army had to pay their maintenance. In this one, if 5 players have the armies they want and one does not, that one is going to have to work fairly hard to trigger a mercenary round, and maybe even not quite as hard, but again significantly and at more cost, in a sense of keeping cards in the out of your hand, to try to push the wage payment. In fact, if only one person is low on troops, I don't think the wage payment happens, because they have 2 mercenary hire cards and 2 church cards. Oh, they can do it with that. Okay, so the question then comes to, how much are other people willing to avoid triggering the wage payment? Because if they're totally willing to, you may not be able to do it. You only have like 6 cards you can put in that pile. And that may change with the expansion. If I played with the full expansion rules, and there's 3 separate variants to that, and I played with one of the tiniest ones. If you play with the big one, there's another set of cards that the players get to play. Some additional actions that they get to choose, revolving around knowledge. And it's possible that those go into the wages. I doubt it, though, because we already have more cards that go into the wage assembly set, and less that go into the taxation. Now, this, I think, is a good design. Let me see what these are labeled as. Because I think the current design is kind of nice, in the sense that taxation is the thing everybody just kind of wants. I mean, certainly some players may not desire it because of a balance issue, but in general, yeah. So the enriched mind is assembly or taxation goes into. And I don't like that. Because that, there's forced march, though, which goes into wages. That's cool. Okay, so there's some new actions that I wasn't aware of too. The enriched mind, though, going into assessment and taxation, means that you might see even more money coming in. Is that a bad thing? Well, more money might mean, hey, I got more money to hire new troops. So people end up triggering into that. There's just this concern that what I saw was a reluctance, maybe because of the poor cities that I chose early on, but a reluctance by most of the players to actually trigger wages, whereas they had a great deal of incentive to create taxation. Then there's the versatile action card, which I really like. That doesn't trigger any of these special events, but it gives you a choice when you draw it, if you've stacked your deck with it, of doing really a lot of different, a weaker version of any of the actions that you have. So if your card is already spent that you need, you still have something that can trigger at least part of what you wanted. Now, in most of the cases, that part's pretty good. The exception there is actually the religion card. You don't get any faith. That's a pretty easy card to replenish, though, because you can always stack that into the deck that's about ready to cause its special event and come back into your hand. But the other options, well, get 2 gold is actually about as good or better than what most of my players saw during their play. Get just 1 political vote seems a little weak. Move or attack with 1 army is weak. So you have lesser options in that. I would also like if there were options for some of the neutral actions. I wish I had more control over that. If I want to rebuild a city, that should be my choice. If I want to up the defenses, if I want to make my troops healthier by taking hit markers off, to some extent that should be my choice. And I think those should be allowed through the versatile actions and maybe through cards of their own. That's something that's not going to be easy to mod. If those things aren't already available in the expansion, making new cards for this is really an impossibility. You'd have to probably make the whole set so that nothing was apparent, because you shuffle these decks together so you don't know whose cards you have, among other things. Overall, I'm fairly pleased with it. It immediately led me to desire to make the game different, which reminds me of how I feel about Magic Realm, except that I enjoyed this more. Magic Realm, I feel like there's a great game in there if I can just reach it. Here, I feel like there's a great game in here if I can just reach it, but there's a good game here that I can reach. And the base game, I think, is fairly good. And this is something different from how I felt about the original Warrior Knights. I was actually very excited to see that this was heavily revamped. There were some things I always liked about Warrior Knights that I wanted to play with. For example, the way that the elections worked in the original Warrior Knights. For some reason or another, I liked that better than I do, say, the way that Parliament works in Kingmaker. However, if you saw my the turn the king came when I started talking about a lot of the modifications I'd like to make to this. Well, if you looked at that one, then you'd realize there are some things that I don't like that are happening in this as well. For example, when somebody dies, their office just disappearing. I like in Kingmaker that it comes back and gets reassigned to someone. In fact, I started writing a game that kind of was a cross between Warrior Knights and a number of other things. Blood Royale. God. And what it turned out being was very similar to Crusader Kings, the Paradox Plaza video game. Except that you did everything manually, and that's really, really tough. It was tracking friendships between different characters and all kind of information that just really is hard to do. One of the things that it took inspiration from was Down with the King, which again is a game that I feel partially gets to the answer but doesn't quite handle the whole thing. I want this, and I want Down with the King, and I want some aspects of Kingmaker, and I want this, and I want that, and I want the other, and I want them all in one place, and that becomes a monster game. It really does. This, on the other hand, is playable, and I think with some mods could be a little bit longer and more complex, but still playable. And I think those are mods that are well within a player's reach to make. On the other hand, if you like a Euro-style game with a lot of conflict in it, this actually is that. The problem I have with it is the victory points in the base game are these little influence markers you want to collect up. And you can sit on your own and kind of avoid conflict and win the game by collecting them. Do I like? I don't like that in terms of a game where I'm trying to become king of the country. However, once you add the king as a part of the game, once the game goes beyond becoming king, then I don't mind it so much that somebody fell into that position, as long as the people who have been fighting and killing one another over taking control of the kingdom have some option to intercede. And I think that the expansion gives a touch of that and enough of a taste that it made me start to see where I wanted to go with it. I don't know what's up next. I have limited time. This week is my last week before I get afflicted with female. So I kind of want to have whatever I play done by then, by Thursday, really, by Wednesday night, say. So I can't start anything too long. And I've been kind of fiddling around with different things. Maxi Bourse, Struggle for Rome from Catan Histories. Space Empires, I think, is going to be too big for me to do over the week. I think I'll hold that off until after she gets here. Then, we get kind of settled down. I might be in a different room for that. And I just don't know if I'm up for an SPQR. I'm having so much trouble motivating for that. Alright, so that's where we're going. And I hope you enjoyed this one, and I'm really sorry for Age of Steam disappearing.